that would be great for us. We have we have a couple of people from Belleville chiming in, and Sarnia and Walshburg and Thunder Bay. Yep. I haven't seen your mark yet.
Yeah.
I don't know how to find it. There it is.
We don't know.
That's right.
Yeah. Thunder Bay on Lake Superior. There we go.
So
Hearts for Valentine's. There we go.
This session is counting things that make it work. So we're really excited to be bringing that to you here this afternoon. All around the province, got lots of folks jumping in now. So thanks for stopping by. We appreciate your time. Busy times, and we try to do this close to the end of the school day so it can just flow in, and then share this information, and then kind of move through your evening. This will also be archived and shared on our blog, but we'll share more about that a little later. So add in your items if you'd like. Any annotations? See a bunch on Sarnia, rods and Kamoka, our man behind the curtain, helping our technology go well. But maybe we can flip over and get Heather work to start projecting her slide deck from Thunder Bay all the way to Walshburg, out to wherever you happen to be.
Yeah. Okay. So here we go. We're going to begin, everyone. And again, we would like you to use the tools available to you through Zoom and check off in the pink, really red, or the yellow, or the green. So how comfortable are you supporting students who struggle with counting? So first one, I'm not sure how to help. In the yellow, I understand lots about counting, but I'd like to have more ways to help. Apparently, somebody named me forgot a 2 in there. And in the green, I know all the small steps used to count. This will help Heather as she has a look at where we kind of stand as far as who she's speaking to and the help that they need.
If you haven't used Zoom before, what you're looking for is the annotate, something that says annotate. If you're on a desktop, it's probably, is it at the bottom of your screen, I think, or the top?
For the desktop, it's at the top.
And then I think on the iPad or the phone, it's at the bottom.
View options might be what you have to, and then see the annotate. Is that right, Ben?
Yeah, but look, I think folks are
we got
finding
lots.
it
Yeah.
resilient, our group on tonight.
Yes. Yeah.
It's but look, we have lots, Mary Lynn, on. We got a few which I would understand, like I'm not sure how to help, but lots want to find more ways to help.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's like in our conversation we've had a lot around how do we help that, Jen?
For sure. So there we go. Okay.
Awesome. So we want to welcome you to today's session on counting and the 3 strategies that make it work. Thank you so much for joining us. We truly appreciate it and taking time out of your busy schedule to learn with us. And before we begin, we'd like to do our local territorial acknowledgement, which we do before all our sessions. So we acknowledge that the land on which we are gathered is part of the traditional territory of the Chippewa, Odawa, Potawatomi, and Delaware nations.
So to discuss during the session today, you will hear Heather talk about the definition of number sequence, along with typical errors that you might find students doing as they are learning, and teaching, ways that you could teach number sequence. We're also going to look at the definition of tagging and pointing, along with typical errors, again, that you might see as students are learning to tag and point, and different ways, again, that you could teach tagging and pointing. And thirdly, definition of coordination, along with typical errors that you might see while students are learning to coordinate, and different ways you might teach coordination. Heather's also going to discuss the key idea of cardinality, which is located at the bottom of the continuum that we use, and as well the key idea of need for organization, also located at the bottom of the continuum.
Gonna be lots to get
Jam-packed,
through.
yep.
So we have a blog, which is LKELEMPRO.blogspot.com. Just type that in a new web browser, and you will be taken to this blog here, which will have an archive of the session that you can refer to later. But also, lots of the concepts that we share and talk about we have lots of content on the blog to help share. And it's all open, public, willing for everyone to take part in it, including the session will be on YouTube, so it's easy to watch and view at a later time. You can skip back through, skip the parts that you didn't like, or were a little bit dry, but get to some of those meat and potato moments where you go like, that is something that's really interesting. So please take part and engage in the learning after the fact as well.
But there won't be any dry parts, Ben. No dry parts.
No, there you go.
I have roles. So right there, you'll skip through that slide.
We're not talking about you, Heather. We're talking about ourselves.
That's
and
right.
The dry parts.
Yeah, that's not a Heather thing. That's a clear on the Ben side of the equation. So we'll flip forward and you can see, speaking of Heather, that is Heather Warwick. She joins us from Thunder Bay. We'll see her video shortly. But Heather is a teacher, researcher, faculty member at Lakehead University, works alongside us in Lambton, Kent all the time. Hey, Heather.
Hi,
Hey, guys.
And then we're so privileged to have Jen Gardner, registered ECE, with us, sharing in. She partners with us as well as able to share with us and with the broader district. So we appreciate you, Jen, being here today. Thank you. Mary Lynn Anderson is our system coordinator for student achievement, and I get to work with programs while my name is Ben. So thanks for being here. So excited to learn together over the next number of minutes.
All right. I guess it sounds like we were joined by some children, so that's awesome. That's always good. Just as a little bit of a startup here, a slide with Dr. Lawson's continuum. This is an extension of the one that you will find in her book that she wrote in 2015 called What to Look For. Just looking at the title, because I always forget the subtitles. I know the title, Understanding and Developing Student Thinking in Early Numeracy. And so when Dr. Lawson and her folks on her team, such as myself, were out presenting this work, out in the province, people were asking us about what happens before the phase at the top, direct modeling and counting. So I'm just going to use, you guys can see my mouse when I move it around, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes,
Yeah, okay, perfect. So up here, these are the phases of student development over, just say over time, but with your intentional planning, students will move through these phases. And so we had a lot of grade 1 and kindergarten teachers who were working on using the continuum, but they wondered what happened before students were in this direct modeling and counting phase. And so Alex added this section of the continuum. We talked about this a little bit more last time, but this piece comes from theoretical work and not from Dr. Lawson's own research. So this is other research that's been done. And so she's added this onto the continuum to help us better understand and work with students who are not yet able to determine how many accurately with any set of objects. So that's what this session is about. We're going to be focusing on these 3 pieces down here, and we're going to start with the number sequence. But basically, in order to count accurately a set of objects, students have to do 3 things. And the first one is the number sequence, which we're going to define and talk about. And then they have to do this tagging or pointing thing, and then the coordinating piece. So I'm going to talk about each of these 3 things, and we're going to hopefully get practical. And if you have any questions, then you can feel free to toss them up in that text chat, or get on the mic and ask it if that's easier for you. So without further ado, we're going to head down and look at number sequence as one of the first things that students need to do in order to count accurately. I will say also that one of the reasons why it's helpful for us to distinguish all of these three different things is because as a teacher, depending on where your student might be making errors, and we're going to look at the different errors that they could make here in these three areas, depending on where they're making errors, you will work with them in a different way than, like if they're making a number sequence error, your choice of what you would do with them would be different than if they're making a tagging and pointing error. So that's why I think it's really important for parents and all educators who work with students at this age to know the distinction across these three things.
I think that was really helpful, Heather.
So the first one that I had on the list is the number sequence, and this one often seems like a real, a bit of a no-brainer perhaps, but basically, in order to count correctly, a student has to be able to say the sequence of number words you use to count, and that definition comes from Dr. Lawson. So the number sequence is that order, that numbers in order that you use to count. Now this picture is a little bit incorrect because you wouldn't say 0, so just pretend the 0 is not there. But he was cute, and it does have the number sequence in there, so I picked the picture. But you don't say 0, of course, when you're counting. But the number sequence, so that order of words, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and so on, that is what we're talking about with number sequence. With number sequence, it doesn't have to be attached to objects. It's just the verbal counting sequence. And this is where I think it gets a bit tricky for us as educators, because sometimes when we try to put everything together, counting objects and the number sequence, it can be tricky. So we're separating out just this knowledge of the numbers moving forward. So what are the kinds of errors that you see? I'm sure you guys could throw in the text chat the kinds of errors that you see with children with their number sequence. So this means just the verbal words that they say. So some classic ones would be missing numbers in the sequence. They just gloss right over them. I saw some video earlier today where the child didn't say the number 4, so it was 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7. So that would be a classic one. They might repeat numbers, so they might say the same number twice, especially one that they know pretty well. I saw a video of that too. So they might count along 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and kind of get to the end of what they know, and then jump back and say 3, 4, 5 because they know that, or just say another number again. They might just say the numbers out of order all over the place. They know they're supposed to say numbers when they're counting, but they don't know that order, and so they just say number words, and that's all that they know. I don't know if there's any questions that people have put in the text chat there.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Throw in letters too. That's sometimes.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Jen. I forget it. It has been a couple years since I've been in kindergarten myself, and my own children, when they've gone through this phase, it was a while ago. But yeah, they just, they don't know always the distinction between numbers and letters and what those things are really. So they'll say letters too. Yeah.
That makes sense because they've memorized both things without really having any knowledge of what they're memorizing, right? So. Yeah. Memorize the numbers, memorize the letters, so mix them up makes sense to me. I can see that happening.
Yeah, exactly. So let's take a look at how you might work with some of these errors. And I think, as a parent, what I would have done with my first before I learned about this, so my kids are, I'm lucky, I guess. My kids may be unlucky, especially the oldest, is that I kind of came to my math learning journey after she was through this phase, but before the younger one was. So she didn't get the benefits, but I did. I mean, I did all the things with her and then switched it up for the second one. So I've had both experiences. So with my older one, I would have always been counting objects. I wouldn't have just been practicing the number sequence without using real objects. But one of the things that we're going to look at doing potentially with these students who are making errors in their number sequence is really just focusing in on just the number sequence and not necessarily having to attach it to the other pieces of counting. So here's a video that Jen, you found this one for us to look at. And we can maybe put a link to it when you put it up in the blog so that people can find it. But here's a little, can you hear the sound?
How many fingers on one hand? How many fingers on one hand? How many fingers on one hand? Let's all count together. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How many fingers on two hands?
All right, you guys get the idea where it would go from there. But basically, this video just works on the number sequence from 1 to 10 repeatedly in a way where they're saying the numbers pretty closely together. And that's something that we were looking at some of the other resources and rhymes and things that people might use where they're working on the forward counting sequence with the numbers pretty close together. And we came up with some other ones. Jen, what else was on our list?
We were talking about the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, once I caught a fish alive.
Right.
And then we had some books, but the really hard part was us coming up with ideas that weren't counting backwards. So it was hard to come up with some going forward. So
yeah, and I'm sure some of you guys have some where the counting sequence goes forward. And we started to wonder about if for the students who are struggling with their number sequence, if all the backwards counting was maybe not helping them out to know the numbers going forward. Because it is a rote, verbal number sequence, and that perhaps the ones who are counting all over the place, especially the ones who are just it sounds like they're throwing out just random numbers, that for them, they need to know it in the forward direction better. And so working on just counting forward would be where we would want to go with those students.
Heather, you made the connection to the alphabet song, A, B, C, D, and how people still sing that as adults to understand the sequence of the alphabet. And do we do the intentional work with the number sequence the same way? And I think the consensus is that, well, we do that with alphabet. We probably don't do it as intentionally with numbers. But things like Eric Carle's 1, 2, 3 to the zoo would be like a book that would connect in with that. And older rhymes like 1, 2, buckle my shoe were like forward progression, but there's lots of other ones, like you said, that go backwards, but intentionally working on that sequence going up as numbers grew.
Yeah, and especially doing it with the kids who do have some number sequence errors, especially the ones who are just saying numbers all over the place. Those students are going to benefit from really intentionally just working on the forward counting sequence and not necessarily having to attach it to objects. Just the sequence by itself would be good. All right, so that's the number sequence for now. We're going to come back to it in a little bit because we're going to look at a student doing some counting. And we're going to move down now to the tagging and pointing. And in Dr. Lawson's book, she called it one-to-one pointing. And then when she made the continuum extension there. She just called it pointing. So I should put one-to-one pointing up here in case you're looking for it in her book. But basically, her definition, this quote is from her book: pointing at or touching each object you are counting only once. So, and that pointing can be with your finger. Some students will effectively do it with their eyes, but usually we see it with the finger and maybe even touching the object. And that's the definition of tagging or one-to-one pointing. And so there's a couple of different, I guess, stages of pointing or tagging errors. And the first one, we're just going to, this is a quick little video here where this young child doesn't really know, he's not trying to touch each object once. He's just, he's seen people count and he's just mimicking. He doesn't really know what they're doing with their finger and why, but you can see that he's had some experiences watching people count and he's trying to mimic that.
Do we start from the top?
3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11.
Wow, it got really long, didn't it? What do you like?
So I'm going to show it one more time. Was it loud enough, Ben, or do I need to turn it up?
You can hear it.
Yeah, okay. So what I would want you to notice there is he has his number sequence to 11 really solidly. He doesn't make any errors in the number sequence, but you know, he's definitely not attending to touching each object once. And there's other things that are falling apart too that we can talk about a little bit later. But let's watch it just one more time and see, you know, so you can hear his counting sequence as being correct, but it's just the tagging and one other piece that's
Do we start from the top?
struggling.
4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11.
Wow, it got really long, didn't it?
Okay, so he doesn't know yet to touch each object once, so he doesn't know this part yet. Now, the other type of tagging error that happens much later is with students who are trying to touch each object once, but they're losing track. And so we're going to deal with this error a little bit later on, because this piece here is something that even adults will do if they are counting a large collection of objects. So this is sort of the last piece that I would worry about trying to help a child fix. But this one here is definitely fodder in your, with your early childhood education in your settings. So we will talk about that one first. So how do you help students who don't yet know, how do you help them to learn to touch each object? So here's a little game that you can try. You can try this one. Can you put one cracker on each plate as a snack time routine, for example? So if you were setting out a snack, can you put one cracker on each plate? That is the action that they're going to need to be able to do when they are counting. So it's sort of preparing them for that motor skill that they're going to need. Or this game, can you touch each item one time? So it's not attached to counting, it's just the action of touching the item, each item. I don't know if there's something that you've seen or done in the classroom, Jen, that would just be about the tagging aspect.
We have a classroom job where someone puts away the shoes, and they usually do them one at a time. I think they're doing it to drag the job out a little bit. But they do. I see it time and time again that they just do one at a time. They're not necessarily counting them, but also out of the bin, they sometimes line them up for their friends. That's kind of an organic way that they're doing that.
Yeah, that same kind of action, that one at a time. And I mean, if you had a student who was struggling with the idea of tagging, then having them do that task a few times and then trying to attach it to a counting sequence with a smaller number, like can you put out 6 of the shoes to see if they'll touch each of those objects and put them out. Okay, back to the continuum, and we're working our way down the list here, and we're at the last one called coordinating. And this is the one I find this one the trickiest, because it actually requires both of the other two, but it is different from the others because in terms of instruction, if a student is struggling with coordinating, I'm going to do something different from what I'm going to do with number sequence and that initial tagging. I do want them, before I'm going to work on coordinating, I definitely need them to have their number sequence down at least up to the number that we're working on counting. So one of the things I forgot to say with number sequence was just like where it typically breaks down. So with number sequence, usually at the first place where it breaks down would be at 6. That's generally the first place where students can maybe count up to 5, and then it starts to fall apart. And then once they get through 6, they're usually good to about 13 or 14, and then it starts to break down there again. And through the teens is quite tricky in our English language. But then once they get to 20, they're usually pretty good. And then it's just remembering what's the order of those decade numbers, you know, because they'll have that number sequence from 1 to 9 solid. So 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29. And then they have to remember what decade comes next. So that's sort of the last piece that comes into place for us. So back to coordinating, if they have a good solid number sequence to 12, then we can certainly work on coordinating with smaller sets than that to help them bring that piece along. But if their number sequence is still not solid past 6, then we would have to be working at even smaller sets than 6 to coordinate. So what is coordinating? So coordinating is assigning a count to each object as you touch it or point at it. And so I'm going to switch, I think, to the document camera for this part. So yeah, back up. There we go. So I'm just going to switch views here. And so I have a set of objects out here. And so a student who can count these objects correctly, it would look maybe something like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And if I do that, what you see is me saying the number sequence in the correct order, 1 through 9. You see me touching each object once and only once. So I didn't accidentally touch something more than once. And you see me saying the word at the right time. And this last piece, this coordinating, is about saying the word at the right time. It would be common in a kindergarten classroom for a child to be asked maybe to count this set of objects, and you might see them do something like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I'll try to do that one more time similarly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So what is happening there? The student is saying the number sequence perfectly. 1 to 11, they have it down. They did not make any number sequence errors. They touched each object once and only once, so they actually didn't make any tagging errors. But they said number words when they weren't coordinating the number word with the objects, and so they ended up with an incorrect count at the end because they said more words than they had objects. I'm going to use this set of objects to look at the other errors that they could make, trying to isolate the different errors. So a student can coordinate and tag perfectly, but make a number sequence error. So that means I'm going to touch each object once and only once, or and I'm going to coordinate my words exactly with the objects, but I'm going to make a number sequence error. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So I touched each object once and only once, and I said my words, I coordinated my words with my touching, but because I didn't say the number 5, that would make that a number sequence error. And of course, it's also possible to make only a tagging error, which is actually the most common for us as adults, which basically means that they generally do one of two things. Either they miss an object completely, or they count an object more than one time. So in this particular set, it could look something like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So again, the number sequence is in perfect order, and the touching of each object once and only once, but I counted these two objects twice. I wonder if there are any questions.
Where does one-to-one correspondence come in? We hear about that a lot. I saw it on the continuum. I'm just, yeah, is that similar or different?
Yeah, some of you might be wondering about one-to-one correspondence because it is commonly written about as sort of the same thing as the coordinating. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, that's what I'm, yeah.
Yeah. So interestingly enough, one-to-one correspondence has been written about incorrectly a number of times, and I don't know if it's just used differently by different researchers, and so maybe it isn't correct. It isn't incorrect, but it's confusing for us as educators because some people talk about one-to-one correspondence differently than others. So in your kindergarten curriculum, one-to-one correspondence takes on the meaning that I'm most familiar with, which is more about a student being able to know that if, for example, they have, but back to that snack time example, let's say I was working with a snack routine and I had 5 plates out on the snack table, and I said to the students, I want to put 1 cracker on each of the plates. How many crackers do I need? Then they would have to look at the 5 plates and translate that. In order to put 1 on each plate, they would also need 5 crackers.
Okay.
And that's it's a key idea, as opposed to, and that's where I'm just going to advance in the slides. It's a key idea. Where do we put it? Somewhere. There, right here. It's in the key ideas area because it's not a strategy that a student would do so much as something that you could imply that a student understands one-to-one correspondence if they're able to do that kind of question where you would ask them how many crackers would you need. I think I saw something pop up in the text chat there. What was that?
Good.
So it says, I also find that some children do not understand that 1 is represented by an object, not just a word.
That's really interesting and not surprising, especially at those early stages that their reason for counting in the beginning with our youngest children is more of a rhyming pattern, like saying the alphabet, and their purpose for counting is actually not generally about finding the number of objects. That's not usually, important for many reasons. I'm going the wrong way. Sorry. We'll get there. I just wanted to head back to where we were. So we were talking about the different, a coordinating error that they will make is as I demonstrated, saying number words when they're not touching an object. These errors, this number sequence, tagging and coordinating, just to make things more interesting, when I was demonstrating it with our set over here, I was trying to just demonstrate one error at a time. But of course, our students can sometimes make two of them, have errors in two of those areas, or even all three, which can make it really more challenging for us as educators to diagnose what exactly is going on. But if they are making errors in multiple spots, then I usually would start with the number sequence and at least getting that up to, past 6 so that I can start working on some of the other pieces. Another thing that I would do to help with coordinating errors would be counting activities or games that have a bigger action than just the pointing. That pointing action that I was showing, that's a pretty small thing, and it doesn't take very much time. And this is a timing issue. So if we can make the action bigger, we can draw attention to the word and the action happening at the same time. So going up the stairs, and we've got a little video of that, I think, or like throwing a beanbag into a hoop and counting counting how many beanbags you're throwing, or counting how many stairs when you're walking. Another one would be moving objects from one place to another. So it makes the action a lot bigger. So we're going to look at a video in a second, but if you had a jar and you had students counting as they're putting objects into the jar, for example, then that would help with coordinating because that action is so much bigger. So we're going to take a look at a couple of videos that you guys took. So this is an example of a student moving objects from one place to another.
Can you put 10 of these into here? Count 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Okay. So that's a pretty straightforward activity on to help with that coordinating. The student is doing pretty well on coordinating for 10 already. And here's the stairs.
Go.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8, 7, 5, 10, 11, 12.
I find this one really interesting to watch. Did you guys have a chance to watch this one already?
Yeah, this was one of my favorites.
Yeah.
So I wonder if folks saw what folks saw in terms of some counting errors or strengths here in this video.
So maybe type that in the chat room. Do you want to play that again? While you play that, why don't we have people type in the chat room what they might have seen as
strength or
Errors,
challenge? Yeah, error.
Go.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8, 7, 5, 10, 11,
see some chats coming in there.
Tagging and
I can,
sequence says SB.
tagging?
Yeah, and
Is that
yeah.
is a sequence a strength or is tagging? What are they thinking? Tagging as a strength?
Or weakness from SB. So fire that in the chat. We've got missing numbers.
Mm-hmm.
Diane is saying the child is still working on number sequence.
Definitely after 5, right? So she has her number sequence to 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then it starts to fall apart. She does know some of the number words above 5 because we hear her saying them.
Yes.
What else is it saying in there?
Repeating numbers, saying numbers out of order. And then Karen saying miscounting steps while stepping.
Yes, so at around step 5, she takes a step and doesn't say a number. And that's a coordinating error that's happening there. Up until that step, she is saying one word for each step, but she definitely takes a step where you would expect her to say 5, and she doesn't say it. She says it on the next step. So good for you for catching that one. Those coordinating errors are a little harder to spot than some of the other two. Number sequence is probably the easiest for us to spot. Tagging is the second, and then coordinating is harder. We got another.
It's challenging to do as she's physically moving up while counting is what is shared too.
It is, yeah. It takes some more focused concentration, and sometimes that's what we want. We want them to be a little bit more focused on what they're doing, and one word for each of those big steps. They have to slow down because it takes some time to actually take a step. So they have to really coordinate that number sequence with the movement, and that's why I suggest it as a possibility for helping us to work on coordinating with kids, because it is a bigger movement than just a point. It draws attention to that connection between the word and the action. Okay, we have one more video that you guys shot to take a look at some counting, and this kind of goes into a nice little story. So we'll take a look at the video, and you guys can watch along and see if you can tell where some of the errors or challenges and some of the strengths that this student has is bringing to this counting activity.
How many rocks do you think are in that container?
10.
Can you spell them out and check for me?
3, 4, 5, 7, 14, 15, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23.
Can you check again for me?
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 18, 19, 20.
How many rocks are there?
20.
Can you check again for me?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 11, 12, 13, 17.
How many rocks are there?
17.
Can you check again for me?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12.
How many rocks are there?
12.
Thank you.
Okay, so this student, I wonder what people are saying in the text chat. What do you see or hear? Consistently missed some higher numbers. Yeah, Karen, she did. She is a bit hard to hear, and especially with the rocks on the metal table. But Jen, what numbers was she missing consistently?
The first time she counted correctly to 12, so it kind of went a little astray after that. The second time she got the 13, and then it went astray, and then it went back to the 12 again. So
okay, so
that way.
Missing 13 is sort of her first gap.
Yes.
Yeah. But her tagging, I mean, she touched each object once and only once. She has some other things that she's doing to help her keep track that we'll talk about in a little bit. And her, you know, her timing of when she says the numbers, the coordinating is on point. So, you know, oops, she was just missing that number. So for her, because she has a lot of the pieces of counting well established in terms of the tagging and the coordinating, it really is just figuring out how to help her with that number sequence. So when you sent this video, I suggested that you do an activity. Jen, do you want to share with us what you did to try to help her out?
Sure. Do you want to show the picture?
Oh, sure. I will. I need to take control
Ben will
of the
get the
screen
picture.
there. Heather, so if you can, I'll share.
Just kidding.
No.
No.
I took a photo of the finished product. So it was suggested to me that we make a special art piece together up to the number 13. So I had her go around the room and collect different items that she wanted to glue to her paper. And I asked her to find me 13 of each object. So we kind of just had them in little pots, just a collection from a handful. We hadn't counted them yet. And we sat down to work on them. And she started with the feathers, of course. And she counted out 12, and then she looked at me. And she said, "What comes after 12? And I said, "Well, why don't you give it a go? Like, just try and see what." So she counted them out again. She stopped at 12, and she looked at me and she said, 13? And I said, "What do you think?" She's like, "Yeah, 13. So then she started gluing them on. And then she picked out Cheerios and got to the 12 again and looked at me. And I said, "Just go for it. Just try again. Just see what you come up with." And she did it again. She did 12, 13. And I said, "Okay, glue them on." And then she went and picked the stickers and the beads, same thing, but didn't really look to me as much. Got to the little wooden sticks and she counted 13. Very proud, glued them on, didn't even ask me. And then she's like, "I've ran out of room. Can I do another one?" Sure. And then I took a step back and let her do it independently. And when I came back, this is the finished product on the right. She had done that all by herself. And she said, "I lined them up so I could count them better." She had said that to me. So I was so proud of her. And ta-da, she can count to 13.
Yeah, so I mean, we picked 13 because that was the first gap in the number sequence. And so, you know, it'd be interesting to go back and do, you know, a general group count with like 14 or 15 objects and see if she says 13. You know, if not, then, you know, we have to go back and do a little bit more work on 13, because what she's basically done at her level, because she's coordinating perfectly and she's tagging perfectly and she understands a lot about counting, but she's missing the number 13. What she's basically done is like when you learn a song and you think the lyrics are one thing and they actually aren't, and you're trying to like relearn it after someone has told you that you have the lyrics wrong, but you keep, you know, going back to what you knew. So it is like muscle memory here, a little bit of, you know, fixing something that she's been practicing incorrectly for a little while. So it might take more than one. We'll see. You'll let us know.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So thank you for sharing that. And we're going to pop back into the slide deck here. I know that we are at past 4:30, but we do have a few more really interesting things to talk about. So far we've looked at these three parts of counting, but we haven't dipped too far down into the blue area, the key ideas down here. And in the case of counting, there are two for sure that we want to talk about. The first one is cardinality. And I don't know if those of you who are watching those videos of Jen with the student that we just finished watching, but at the end of counting the set, Jen, you asked a question there. What was that question that you asked? Do you remember?
So how many rocks are there?
Yeah, so they counted the set. Ben, you were going to say something?
No, that's
Oh.
exactly it.
Just making sure I knew what I was talking
Oh,
about.
no. I was thinking about, I remember we're at a ministry session, they talked about trusting the count. So you do the count, and then you trust the count to say, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then you trust the count to say 5, not just to have to recount the whole set again.
This idea of cardinality is often referred to as a little bit of trust. So at its most basic level, I'm going to switch the camera over. Oh, it's out of place now. I'm going to switch the camera over to look at this set of objects, and let's just go with 5 to make it a little faster. But when a student is counting a set of objects, especially your younger students, if you say, can you count those objects? They might be able to say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And if you say, so how many are there? They might go and say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So then you might say, so how many cubes is that? And if they go back and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, what they haven't learned yet is that when they're counting a set, that last number that they say actually represents the quantity in the whole set. And so this idea of cardinality comes through a lot in subitizing, because you're always looking at the number in the whole set and not sort of identifying parts of it as you go up, as you do with counting. And so subitizing is like our power card to help our students with cardinality. And we can use it to help them with pieces of counting too, if they already know how many are going to be in that set, because they know how to subitize to 4 or 5, we could ask them to do something like, how would you count that? And they already know how many are there. What we want a student to be able to do is at the end, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, if you say how many cubes is that, for them to be able to say 5. And as Ben was alluding to, really be confident and trust that that's that whole set. That last number we say represents that whole set. So when you're doing your counting work with your students in your early childhood education settings, don't take for granted that just because they were able to get to the correct number at the end, that they actually know what that means. So do layer in that question like we heard Jen say, so how many are there? And see what happens. Some of them might go back and recount the set, and that will tell you a little bit about their understanding of cardinality. And then my recommendation would be for you to work with some subitizing to help really develop stronger cardinality. And you can also count after subitizing a set. You could say, well, what would it look like if we counted that, to connect the two pieces, the counting and the cardinality from their subitizing work. And if you're not sure what subitizing is, you can check out the session we did last week where we talked about subitizing.
It's on the blog.
Exactly.
I ran into that today. It was, I kind of went down the rabbit hole. It was this whole loop. How many did you count? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So how many did you count? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It was just a little guy. So I'm like, we got to go back a little bit.
So they can for sure accurately count a set and not really know what that means. It's, so asking them at the end, so how many cubes are there? Is an important piece. And then building your, working with your subitizing. If they can subitize 1, 2, 3, 4, then work with those small sets and see if you can't connect the two. It's a great example. So the last one that we want to talk about before we sign off for the day is this one at the bottom. It's a small box for a big piece. This need for organizing, or need for organization, and sometimes called the need for organization and keeping track. This is what happens. Earlier, I alluded to the fact that with tagging, there's this error that comes later. Once they know that they want to try and touch each object once and only once, they do sometimes make errors in tagging by touching the same object twice or missing an object, generally because it's a large set that's randomly down, maybe rolled out of the box like those rocks that we saw earlier, and the student is having trouble remembering which objects they've already touched. Now, the student we were watching with the rocks, she had a way of organizing and keeping track, which was to move them off to the side. And I know for myself as a parent, that's something with my first child, I would have told her what to do. I would have said, now touch them, move them off to the side or something like that to help her organize so she didn't make a mistake. But what I would try to do now is I actually want them to develop, as it says in this here, the need for organizing, not just the skill of organizing, but developing that need for organizing. And if I want to develop the need for organizing, I need the student to come to this for themselves. So if a student is at the stage where they can count a set of objects, they can use their number sequence, they can touch each object once and only once, they can say the number word at the same time as they are touching. So they're coordinating and they've got the number sequence down. And the only error that they're making is that when the set is kind of jumbled, that they might double tag or they might miss an item. Then I'm going to pair them, sit them down with other students at a small table, and I'm going to pick one student who is organizing in some way. Maybe they're lining them up, or maybe they're moving them off to the side. I was doing something and I realized I wasn't showing it. So maybe they're lining them up, or maybe they're moving them as they're counting. So one student would be doing that, and maybe one or two of the other students would be making errors. At this point, in order for this to work, they do need to know that if you count a set of objects, that's how many should be there. And every time you count it, you should get to the same amount, so that if they're counting and then they're checking and they're getting a different number and they know that that's not okay, they're ready for this type of instruction where they're sitting at a small group with a few students who are struggling in this way and one student who's lining them up, so you can facilitate the conversation. For example, what are you doing over there? What are you doing and why are you doing that? So that they can say out loud, well, I want to make sure that I don't double count or that I get each object, and that will resonate with the students who are ready to learn it.
A peer understanding that kind of develops with each other. That's a great strategy.
As opposed to us telling them to do it, because then they can develop the skill of doing it, but they're not going to develop the need for it. They won't really understand why they're lining them up, just that they're lining them up.
I found it fascinating to look at Jen's art work today of 13 and how the students started. And then, it's all over the place. Yeah. If you look where the beads are and where the Cheerios are on the first one, there is no grouping whatsoever. And then you go to the second page and she has just on her own realized this is a whole lot better if I just line everything up. And by herself, there was no Jen helping her for that. So very cool.
Yeah, and when you watch her count, you can tell she does have a method for keeping track. She does move them from one location to the other. So whether she was told to do that or not, she has developed that need for organizing, or at least she did today. She realized this would be a lot easier if I kept them organized.
And this key idea has lots of legs as it goes forward, right? Because that's throughout mathematics, not just the early years.
Oh, yes. We know that definitely in mathematics, we need to organize our thinking and we need to keep track of what we've done already. And so this is a key idea that continues on in all areas of mathematics, even though it's just a little wee box over here. It is something that we continue to develop moving forward.
Okay, so we're at the end. Thank you, Heather, and thank you to our participants who've been sitting and listening and learning about counting. If you want to learn more, there's always What to Look For, the book by Alex Lawson that we've been referring to throughout the session. You can ask a colleague. If you're an LKDSB employee, then certainly you can connect with one of our coaches. You can always go to and this is for anybody, the blog spot from LKELEM Pro, and where this session will be, and the one on subitizing, as well as tons of other ones about math. And so those are places that you can go and find out more if you want.
And we would love to hear from you. So please go to our URL for this session, tinyurl.com/counting2020. So you type that into your browser and it'll bring you to a form. Even if you don't want a participation certificate, we'd really like to hear what you think of the session. But if you would like that, maybe for some of your professional learning hours for the College of Early Childhood Educators, we could certainly provide you a certificate, as we did for folks who took part last week. So just go here and please give us some feedback, or and as well, there's a spot for your name, which is optional, and the email address if you'd like a certificate. We'd love to provide that for you as well. tinyurl.com/counting2020. And thank you. We appreciate you being here today. That's taking the time out to figure out how we can help students learn how to count better and build some strong foundations in mathematics are super appreciated. So thanks for your time. Thank you to Heather for her taking the time. Thank you to Jen for being part of this and engaging in this rich conversation. And 13 is working for that student, and we saw lots of that, which is really neat. So thank you, Jen, for bringing in such earnest examples. And Mary Lynn, appreciate you being part of this today. So thanks for all that. If you are looking for more, guess what? We've got another session, same time, same channel, next week, next Wednesday. If you're within the Lambton Kent School Board, you've got instructional coaches around your building throughout the year, so please connect with them. And as well, our blog always has lots of things on there. So thanks for jumping in with us, and we hope that you have a great rest of your evening. Stay warm and count well. Count well, my friends, count well.